Hello, Michael Arnold here again, and Bernard the Barrister Bear. And this is part 2 of I'm Alright, Jack. The phrase I'm Alright, Jack actually arose, it seems, in World War II and is short for blow you, Jack, I'm alright. In other words, it's indicative of great selfishness. And that is really what strikes are. They're very selfish. I know in this country people are reluctant to condemn strikes. They seem to think that they have to be sympathetic to strikes. But that's not the case, for example, in America, where they have very few strikes now. Legally, a strike is a breach of contract and entitles the employer to fire, to terminate the striking workers. In the United Kingdom, that was mitigated by law that allowed strikes to be legal, provided a secret ballot was held under certain conditions. But the general law still remains. If the rules about ballots are not followed, a strike is illegal and the strikers can be fired. So the idea that a strike must always be supported is completely wrong, I believe. Its impact on the economy, particularly amongst public employees, if they are on strike, the impact of a strike by public employees can be disastrous. And this video is being recorded at a time when there are numerous public employee strikes, plus railway strikes, because technically railway workers are no longer employed by the government. They are employed by individual private railway companies. But in practice, it amounts to being public employees. And any law about public employees should undoubtedly include them. The government, besides introducing these ballots many years ago, the government has been very, very, very hesitant to act in any way against strikes, which is harming the economy very seriously. A few months back, in 2022, legislation was passed to allow employers to hire strike breakers through employment agencies. It was all geared through employment agencies. Employment agencies were allowed and are allowed to employ strike breakers, and employers can go to them for that. In practice, that law is a dead letter, because employment agencies are very often reluctant to offend the union. They do not want to make strike breakers available, and not many of them do. So it's practically a dead letter, I would say. If the government really wants to control strikes, which they should do, in the interests of the economy and in the interests of the public, then it should be much wider. Why should it be limited to employment agencies? Why not simply say employers are allowed to employ strike breakers? Yes, those strike breakers will have a hard time going through the picket line, probably being spat at, and called scabs or blacklegs or other unpleasant names, but they perform a useful function, which is to stop the very serious effects that strikes have. Nursing strikes are, of course, ones that people have more sympathy for. Nurses are not particularly well paid, though at the moment, I understand, late December 2022, they've been made an offer of 9.5% increase, which is not much less than that of than inflation at the moment. But the point about nurses' strikes is, however sympathetic one may be to their position economically, one has to think of the effect of medical staff, healthcare workers of any kind withdrawing their labor. It will impact the health of the community and actually conflict with the right to life of individuals under Article 2 of the European Convention on Human Rights. So I would say there should be much more control of strikes, as there is in America, for example. In America, the Taft-Hartley Act of 1947 forbids any federal employee from engaging in a strike. And there are very few of those strikes now, especially after the 1981 decisive action taken by President Ronald Reagan against striking air traffic controllers. There were 13,000 air traffic controllers who went on strike. Reagan gave them 48 hours to return to work. About 10% did, and they continued to work normally. The remaining 90% stayed out on strike, and they were unceremoniously fired and not allowed to work again for the federal government for the rest of their lives. Although that was reversed by President Bill Clinton in 1993. 1993, 12 years later. Well, very few of these original strikers ever worked again for the government. So what that was a very decisive act, was also a shot across the bows for any other public workers to follow suit, and they haven't. And it's a very important thing to keep your public services running. Otherwise, the country becomes basically a third world country, especially when basic services are withdrawn. And we're already seeing that here in 2022. We're seeing strikes in, of course, not only the railways, also the Royal Mail, healthcare, and other sectors, road workers. Very serious impact on the economy by withdrawing those services, and ultimately, if the government gives in to the demands of strikers and gives them high increases, that has an effect on the economy. Inflation, as a result of which the increased wages are actually worth less than the original wages were before the strike began. Strikers do not normally recognize that danger, but it is very important to stress that. may seem inhumane to say, oh, you can't strike, you're not allowed to strike. Say, you are denied collective bargaining, which is what it's all about, supposedly. But public employees do have a lot of perks. Railway workers, for example, besides being extremely well paid, several hundred of them earning over £100,000 a year. Besides all that, they have free travel, depending on their grade, depending on their company they're working for. They may have free rail travel throughout the world, or certainly at least in the United Kingdom. So one should not shed too many tears over the plight of railway workers. But by withdrawing their labor, railway workers are impacting the economy in a very serious way. People can't get to work. People can't transport their goods the same as before. People can't go on holiday as much as before. It affects every sector of the economy. Every sector of the economy. So it's time the government took action. Strikes are not a human right. Strikes strike at the human rights of individuals, the right to life and other rights more indirectly. And it's time the government stepped up to the plate and took action, as has been done in America for a long time now. This is nothing new, especially in regard to public employees, and that must include railway workers who are technically not public employees. That's all for me. More next time. Bye.